The train whistle screeched through the afternoon air as Zara Blackburn clutched her single worn valise. Her bare feet curled against the splintering wood of the platform as she stepped off the Kansas Pacific Railway at Cottonwood Springs in the spring of 1873. The journey from Philadelphia had left her threadbare dress dusty, and her dark hair falling loose from its once neat arrangement. But it was her shoeless state that drew curious stares from the townsfolk gathered at the station. "You must be the mail-order bride," said the station master, looking down at her feet with an expression caught between pity and amusement. "Griffin Yates is waiting for you over yonder." Zara followed his pointing finger to a tall man leaning against a weathered wagon. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the hard lines around his mouth, the sun-bronzed skin of a man who spent his days outdoors. He wore no bandana or flashy vest like the cowboys in the penny novels she'd read back east, just a simple cotton shirt, worn denim pants, and scuffed boots. When she approached, Griffin Yates' gaze traveled down to her bare feet and then back to her face. His eyes, a startling blue beneath the shadow of his hat, betrayed nothing of his thoughts. Without a word, he took her valise and loaded it into the wagon. I lost my shoes," Zara explained, her cheeks burning. "There was a river crossing before Denver. The stagecoach got stuck, and when I climbed out to help, the current took them." She didn't mention they'd been her only pair, or how she'd wrapped rags around her feet for the remainder of her journey, discarding them just before arrival because they'd become too filthy. Griffin said nothing, his face impassive. He simply lifted her into the wagon and climbed up beside her. As they pulled away from the station, Zara felt the stares of the townspeople boring into her back. The road out of town was rutted and bumpy. Griffin maintained his silence, occasionally glancing at her bare feet. After nearly 20 minutes of traveling through scrubland dotted with cottonwoods and distant mesas, he pulled the wagon to a stop beside a small creek. Without explanation, he climbed down and disappeared to the rear of the wagon. Zara watched nervously as he returned with a bucket and filled it at the creek. When he came back, he set the bucket near her feet and reached up to help her down. "What?" she began, but he was already pulling a small cloth from his pocket. He gestured for her to sit on a large, flat rock at the creek's edge. Confused, Zara obeyed. Griffin knelt before her and dipped the cloth into the water. With unexpected gentleness, he lifted one of her feet and began to clean away the dust and grit embedded in her skin. The water was pleasantly warm from sitting in the sun, and Zara realized he had purposely chosen this spot, this time of day, knowing the creek water would be comfortable. The tenderness of this silent act brought tears to her eyes. After all the humiliation of her journey, this wordless kindness from a stranger, her husband, to be touched something deep within her. "Thank you," she whispered. Griffin's eyes flicked up to meet hers briefly, then returned to his task. When both her feet were clean, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a pair of thick woolen socks. "My sisters," he said, his voice low and rough, as if unused to speaking. "Until we can get you proper shoes." They were the first words he'd spoken to her. The ride to Griffin's ranch was another hour through increasingly rugged terrain. As they traveled, Zara gathered her courage and began to speak, filling the silence with stories of her life in Philadelphia, where she had worked as a seamstress after her parents died of influenza. She explained how, with no family left and prospects growing dim, she had answered his advertisement for a bride. Griffin listened, occasionally nodding but offering little in return. Eventually, a small homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled against the foothills with mountains rising in the distance. "It's beautiful," Zara said sincerely, taking in the sweeping landscape. It's hard, Griffin replied. Winter's brutal, summer's scorching. Spring brings floods, fall brings drought. He paused. If you want to go back east, I won't hold you to anything. Zara looked at him with surprise. I've come all this way. I'm not afraid of hard work. As Griffin helped her down from the wagon, a large dog came bounding around the corner of the cabin, barking enthusiastically. That's Ranger, Griffin said as the dog circled them, sniffing at Zara's dress. He's friendly. The cabin was simple but clean, one main room with a stone fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a curtained-off section that presumably contained the bed. A ladder led to a small loft. My sister Martha stayed here until last month, Griffin explained, setting Zara's valise down. She married a shopkeeper in town. I'll sleep in the loft until. He trailed off, a hint of color touching his weathered cheeks. Zara understood the implication. Until they were married. Until they were truly husband and wife. I need to tend the animals, Griffin said abruptly, heading for the door. There's stew in the pot, water in the barrel. Wedding set for Saturday if that suits. Saturday was 4 days away. Zara nodded and Griffin disappeared outside. Alone in the cabin, Zara took stock of her new home. Despite its simplicity, there were touches that spoke of care: hand-sewn curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, a small shelf of books. She opened her valise and removed her few belongings, including the wedding dress she'd sewn herself during the journey. By the time Griffin returned, Zara had warmed the stew and set the table. They ate in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than before, less strained, more companionable. After supper, Griffin cleared his throat. I need to ride into town tomorrow for supplies and shoes for you. I can make do with. No, he interrupted firmly. You need proper shoes. I'll need to measure your feet. Zara felt her cheeks flush as Griffin fetched a piece of string and knelt before her once more. His calloused fingers were gentle as he wrapped the string around her foot, marking the measurements with a piece of charcoal. I'm sorry, she said suddenly. About arriving this way. It must have been embarrassing for you, having your bride show up barefoot like some vagabond. Griffin looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers directly for the first time. No shame in hardship, he said quietly, only in how we face it. The next morning, Griffin rode out early, leaving Zara to explore the homestead. She discovered a small vegetable garden behind the cabin that needed weeding, a chicken coop with 6 laying hens, and a spring fed well with the sweetest water she had ever tasted. By midday, she had cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, prepared a batch of biscuits using the supplies she found in the kitchen, and mended a shirt she discovered with a torn sleeve. Griffin returned late in the afternoon, his wagon loaded with supplies. Among his purchases was a pair of sturdy leather boots for Zara. Try them, he said, handing her the package. The boots were simple but well made, with enough room to accommodate the woolen socks she still wore. When she stood and took a few experimental steps, Griffin watched with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. They fit well, she said, smiling. Thank you. Griffin nodded, then began unloading the supplies. Zara hurried to help him, noting the sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, salt pork, and various tools and household items. At the bottom of one crate, she discovered a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? She asked, holding it up. Griffin's ears reddened. Ribbons, he mumbled. For your hair, or whatever women use them for. Touched by the unexpected gift, Zara carefully unwrapped the package to find 3 lengths of ribbon, 1 blue, 1 green, and 1 a deep burgundy. They're beautiful, she said softly. Thank you, Griffin. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Griffin finally began to speak of himself. He had come west after the war between the states, unable to return to the Tennessee farm where he'd grown up. His parents were dead, the farm seized for taxes. With his younger sister Martha in tow, he had traveled west, working as a cattle driver until he saved enough to buy this land 5 years ago. "Why did you advertise for a bride?" Zara asked, the question that had been on her mind since she'd first seen his notice in the newspaper. Griffin stared into the fire. "Martha worried about me being alone," he admitted. "When she married Tom, she made me promise to find someone." He paused. "And winter nights get long out here. A man thinks too much when he's alone." Over the next 3 days, they fell into a routine. Griffin would work the ranch tending the small herd of cattle, repairing fences, and preparing for the coming summer while Zara kept the house, tended the garden, and learned the rhythms of her new home. Each evening they would share their supper, and Griffin would tell her more about the land, the neighbors, the closest being 3 miles away, and the challenges of ranching in this harsh but beautiful country. On the night before their wedding, Zara sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her hair. Griffin watched from his chair by the fire, his expression unreadable. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked, setting down her brush. Griffin shook his head. "No, but I want to be sure you aren't." "I'm not," Zara said firmly. "I came here to be your wife, Griffin." "Nothing I've seen has changed my mind about that." Something in his expression softened. "You haven't had an easy start here." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged with a small smile. "But neither did you when you first came west. We all begin somewhere." The wedding was a simple affair at the small church in Cottonwood Springs. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Walsh, performed the ceremony. Martha and her husband Tom served as witnesses, along with a few of Griffin's neighbors who had ridden in for the occasion. Zara wore her carefully sewn wedding dress, a modest creation of cream-colored cotton with lace she had salvaged from her mother's wedding gown. Her dark hair was arranged in a neat bun, adorned with the blue ribbon Griffin had given her. And on her feet were her new boots, polished until they shone. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Griffin hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a gentle kiss on Zara's lips. It was brief, almost chaste, but Zara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine streaming through the church windows. The small reception was held at the town's only hotel, where Martha had arranged for cake and punch to be served. As they prepared to leave, Martha pulled Zara aside. "I worried about him, you know," she confided, glancing toward Griffin, who was speaking with Tom near the door. "After the war, he hardly spoke for nearly a year. Too many horrors, I think. He's always been quiet, but it was different then." She squeezed Zara's hand. "He's speaking more since you came. That's a good sign." On the ride back to the ranch, their home now, truly Zara thought about Martha's words. Griffin did seem more at ease, his sentences longer, his silences less frequent. When they arrived, he surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," he said, setting her down gently in the middle of the cabin. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tender hesitation that gradually gave way to passion. In the quiet aftermath, Zara traced the outline of a scar on Griffin's shoulder, one of several that marked his body. "Shiloh," he said, answering her unspoken question. "I was 19. Zara pressed her lips to the scar. "And this one?" she asked, touching another on his side. "Chickamauga." She kissed that one too, then found another near his collarbone. "And this?" "That," he said, with unexpected lightness in his voice, "was from Martha throwing a hairbrush at me when she was 12. Zara laughed, and Griffin joined her, the sound of his laughter filling the small cabin like music. Spring turned to summer, and Zara adapted to the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to ride the gentle mare Griffin had purchased for her, to help with the cattle when needed, and to preserve the bounty from her expanded garden for the winter ahead. The nearest neighbor's wife, Sarah Johnson, taught her to make soap and candles, skills she had never needed in Philadelphia. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Griffin took her hand. "Are you happy here?" he asked, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I am," Zara answered truthfully. "Happier than I ever expected to be." Griffin nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Winter will be harder. We might get snowed in for weeks." "Then we'll have each other for company," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. Griffin's arm came around her waist, pulling her closer. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted quietly. "After the war, I didn't think I deserved peace." Zara turned to look up at him. "Everyone deserves peace, Griffin." He gazed at her with such tenderness that Zara felt her heart might overflow. "I found mine the moment you stepped off that train," he said, "even without your shoes." The first snow came in November, earlier than usual according to Griffin. By December, the ranch was blanketed in white. The world outside their window transformed into a glistening wonderland that was both beautiful and treacherous. As predicted, they were snowed in for days at a time, but Zara found she didn't mind. Their cabin was warm and well-stocked, and the forced confinement gave them time together that the demands of ranch work usually didn't allow. It was during one of these snowbound days that Zara first felt the fluttering in her belly, the unmistakable movement of new life. "Griffin," she said, looking up from her sewing, "come here." Concerned by her tone, Griffin quickly crossed the room to her side. "What is it? Are you unwell?" In answer, Zara took his hand and placed it on her slightly rounded stomach. For a moment, nothing happened, and then there it was again, a definite movement beneath his palm. Griffin's eyes widened. "Is that your child?" Zara confirmed, her eyes filling with happy tears. "Our child." Griffin sank to his knees before her, both hands now cradling her belly as if it contained the most precious treasure in the world. When he looked up at her, Zara saw that his eyes were wet. "I never thought," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "After everything I've seen, everything I've done, I never thought I'd be given such a gift." Zara leaned down to press her forehead against his. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Griffin Yates, and I intend to give it to you." The remainder of winter passed in a blur of preparation. Griffin worked tirelessly to expand the cabin, adding a small second room for the baby. Zara sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket, using scraps of fabric that Martha brought from town when the roads were passable. Spring arrived with the melting snow revealing new growth beneath tender green shoots pushing through the softening earth, a perfect metaphor for the new life growing within Zara. By May, she was heavy with child, her movements slower but her spirit undimmed. It was a warm evening in early June when Zara's labor began. Griffin rode like the wind to fetch Sarah Johnson, who had assisted at many births. By the time they returned, Zara's pains were coming steadily. "You'll need to heat water," Sarah instructed Griffin. "Lots of it, and then wait outside." Griffin looked stricken. "I can't leave her." "It's not proper for a man to be present," Sarah insisted. "Please," Zara said, reaching for Griffin's hand through a contraction. "I want him with me." Sarah relented, though she muttered about modern notions and impropriety as she prepared for the birth. Through the long night, Griffin never left Zara's side, wiping her brow, holding her hands and murmuring words of encouragement and love. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, their daughter entered the world with a robust cry. "She has your eyes," Zara whispered exhaustedly as Griffin carefully held their tiny daughter, wrapped in the quilt Zara had made. "And your spirit," Griffin replied, his voice filled with awe. "What shall we call her? Hope," Zara suggested. "Because that's what she is, our hope for the future." Griffin nodded, gently placing Hope in Zara's arms. "Hope Martha Yates," he said. "A good, strong name." As the summer progressed, life settled into a new rhythm centered around their daughter. Hope thrived, growing stronger each day, her blue eyes watching the world with curious intensity. Griffin doted on her, often carrying her with him as he worked around the homestead, pointing out cattle and wildflowers alike in his deep, gentle voice. One evening in August, exactly 1 year after their conversation on the porch, Griffin and Zara sat in the same spot, Hope sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "I've been thinking," Griffin said, his arm around Zara's shoulders, "about the day you arrived." "Without my shoes," Zara added with a soft laugh. "Not my finest moment." "It was the moment I knew," Griffin said seriously. "When I saw you standing there, chin up despite everything, determined not to be beaten by circumstance." He paused. "That's when I knew you were meant for this life." "For me? And when did you know you loved me?" Zara asked, curious. Griffin smiled, the expression now coming easily to him. "When I knelt to wash your feet at the creek," he admitted. "I'd never cared for anyone that way before, except Martha when she was small. It scared me, how much I wanted to protect you, to care for you. And I fell in love with you in that same moment," Zara confessed. "Your silence didn't matter. Your actions spoke volumes." They sat together as twilight deepened around them, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Hope stirred in her sleep, making the tiny snuffling noises that never failed to melt Zara's heart. "I wouldn't change a thing, you know," she said quietly. "Not the lost shoes, not the difficult journey. It all led me here, to you and Hope, to this life." Griffin tightened his arm around her. "Nor would I," he agreed. "Though I do think I'll buy you another pair of boots before winter. Those are looking a bit worn." Zara laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful ranch as night settled over their home. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The ranch prospered under Griffin and Zara's care, expanding to include more cattle and horses. Their family grew as well. Hope was joined by a brother, Gabriel, and later by twins, Emma and Elijah. The small cabin evolved into a proper house with multiple rooms, a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides, and glass windows ordered all the way from St. Louis. Griffin built a schoolroom addition when Hope reached school age, and Zara, drawing on her own education, taught not only their children but also those from 2 neighboring ranches who rode over 3 times a week. On the morning of their 5th wedding anniversary, Griffin woke Zara before dawn. "I have something to show you," he said mysteriously, helping her dress warmly against the spring chill. They slipped out quietly, leaving the children sleeping under the watchful eye of their hired girl, Julia. Griffin led Zara to the barn where 2 horses were saddled and waiting. "Where are we going?" Zara asked, intrigued. "You'll see," Griffin replied with a smile. They rode for nearly an hour as the eastern sky lightened, following a path that wound up into the foothills. Finally, Griffin drew his horse to a halt atop a rise that overlooked the entire valley. In the distance, their ranch was visible, smoke curling from the chimney as Julia prepared breakfast. "It's beautiful," Zara said, taking in the panoramic view. "I came here the day before you arrived," Griffin told her, dismounting and helping her down. "I was nervous about meeting you, about whether you'd want to stay once you saw how hard life could be out here." He spread a blanket on a flat rock and set down the bundle he'd carried. "I came up here to think, to prepare myself for disappointment." Zara sat beside him, watching as he unpacked a small breakfast: fresh bread, hard-boiled eggs, and coffee in a metal flask. "And now I bring you here to celebrate," he said simply. "5 years of a life better than anything I could have imagined." As they ate, watching the sun rise fully over the mountains, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From her desperate decision to become a mail-order bride to the mishaps of her journey west, from her shoeless arrival to Griffin's silent compassion, every step had been necessary. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked. "If I'd kept my shoes, if I'd arrived looking respectable and proper," Griffin considered this. "I don't think it would have changed anything important," he said finally. "We would have found our way to each other one way or another." "How can you be so sure?" Zara asked, genuinely curious. Griffin smiled, taking her hand in his. "Because some things are meant to be," he said. "And we were written in the stars long before you stepped off that train." As they rode back to the ranch, to their children and their life together, Zara knew he was right. Their love story had begun in the most unexpected way, with missing shoes and warm creek water, with silence and gentle hands, but it had grown into something profound and unshakable. And as their house came into view, with Hope standing on the porch waving excitedly at their approach, Zara felt a wave of gratitude for every hardship and blessing that had led her here, to this man, this family, this life. This was where she belonged. This was home.